That would be good. Hello, everybody. While we're waiting for a few, probably maybe some more people joining, I'd like to ask Robert Hunziker to introduce himself. We've seen his excellent piece on it. Well, obviously it's excellent for us because it's much needed publicity for our cause. But perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself, Robert?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. I want to learn, and it was really interesting doing some research to write this article. I've been researching and writing about what's happening with our global climate system now for over 10 years, and I was really moved to delve into this subject a number of years ago when James Hansen spoke to the US Senate in 1988, in fact, and talked about we were changing our climate, the chemistry of our climate. And that's the thing that motivated me to start looking into this. And I've spent the last number of years reading everything I can. And I've written a lot of articles, probably 300 or 400. It's a challenging field because people don't connect the way you'd like for them to connect. And when I say that, I'm referring to the average common person out there. You know, in my case, I've been in Southern California for 30 years. And what's interesting is I read about all of these things happening with our climate system that are pretty negative, but yet it's the same for me today as it was 30 years ago. The climate and the weather in Southern California, where I live, not too far from the beach, seems the same today. So it must for everybody else who lives around here as well. So when they read my articles, and I get a lot of feedback, by the way, I get emails, especially on the Counterpunch publications, because they have pretty good reach throughout the world. In fact, I hear from people in Siberia, in Japan, China, Australia. I get a lot of emails from people in Australia. They have a high degree of interest in what's happening with the climate system in Australia. I really get a lot, and New Zealand as well. But one of the common threads that comes through all of this, and by the way, I also get a lot of emails from people in academia. And there are even some people with some financial, I mean, not financial, but educational institutions here in the US that use some of my articles teaching their courses. So it's interesting. But the point I wanted to make is that it's really hard for people, unless they're really deeply involved in this subject the way I am, to understand the gravity of it. And I think part of it is because where it really shows up is on the fringe of civilization. I mean, honestly, who lives in the Arctic and who lives in Greenland and who lives in Antarctica and where the permafrost is in Siberia? Who really lives there to see what's happening other than scientists who make trips there? So it's a really tough nut to crack to get the public at large to really embrace this issue, I think. And I think that's part of the issue and part of the problem in motivating money to get involved in the issue and to support programs like what you want to support, like what you want to do. So if you don't have a groundswell of public opinion, it's like trying to elect a public officer. They're not going to get elected. And I don't know what it takes to move that. But that's what I've sensed in everything that I do. And I'll just continue on pounding away, writing away and doing what I can. But I'm more than pleased to do whatever I can to help your efforts. And I'd like to learn more about what you're trying to do.
So are you a professional journalist?
Huh?
Are you a professional journalist or just a freelancer?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm an independent. I'm independent though, but yes, I am. That's all I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you. And I think things could change because of what's happened in the last year and the year, and to some extent the year before. Um, I gauge this from my son Edwin, who was living in Phoenix, Arizona for a time, and Colorado, and then he's moved to Vancouver Island, so he's getting a bit of Canada, and he's really worried that the jet stream is going to stick more or less permanently in one state and create a heat dome and drought and make parts of the Pacific West Coast uninhabitable. And so there's a potentially big body of people who are potentially have a huge impact from what's happening, and they're seeing it build up. They're seeing the repercussions of having a gobsmacking hot global temperature last year, and they're getting warnings about sea level rise, which Florida should take note of. Even people like Trump should take note that the other thing is that gives me hope is that there's the UN body who's tasked with the UNFCCC, its remit is to avoid dangerous climate change. Well, they stick in an anthropomorphic, anthropogenic is the word I'm looking for, climate change. So, and they failed, basically. I think they failed on any reasonable measure to avoid dangerous climate change. It's not that the danger has hit everybody, but it's very clear that it's going to hit practically everybody, and it will affect the GDP of all the major nations, and possibly be existential for the smaller small island states. When the sea level rise, they won't be able to keep up with sea level rise of a meter or more. So so I think that there's a dawning that the UNFCCC has failed, the COP has failed, the COP process has failed, and so what is the world to do about it? And we've got an answer. We need to cool things down, and it's a very simple message. And the place we need to cool most urgently is the Arctic. And one might think that's hubris or impossible or something, but I've been trying to establish how much cooling power we might need, and it's pretty horrendous. But we could almost certainly do it with stratospheric aerosol injection, which is why I keep plugging it. And the nice thing is that the studies that have been coming out on stratospheric aerosol injection suggests that there's no obvious showstopper for it. Certain people like Ken Caldeira, you've probably heard of Ken Caldeira. Have you heard of him, Robert?
I'm sorry, about whom?
He's at Stanford.
Ken Ken Caldera.
Yes, oh, definitely I have. Oh, yeah, I
Yeah.
have, yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm
Well,
familiar with
well, he used to run the geoengineering group for many years until somebody else took over. And whose name I'm trying to remember.
Andrew Lockley.
Correct. Thank you, Robert, for the prompt. Yeah, he was featured in an article of the Scientific American a couple of months ago. I think it might have been the October issue, and where there was an article on SRM, which was gave the flavor of being of the author of the article was clearly against the whole idea of SRM. But
opposed to the whole idea, the article? Did you say?
Yes, that's the flavor you got. But in particular from Ken Caldera, he was saying that there needed to be tests on a small scale of stratospheric aerosol injection. And he said the best thing that could come out of that would be a showstopper. So,
Well, I think one of the things, John, is that it's extremely rare for the argument for lowering the temperature to get any positive media coverage, such as your article, Robert, has provided. Just in terms of our process here, we've got 4 people who raised their hands to comment, and I think while we've got you with us, Robert, it's just a good opportunity for a conversation with you. And so, I mean, you might like to respond to what John has said. I also just wanted to welcome Jeff Suchon. I think, Jeff, is this your first meeting with us?
Yeah. Oh, one second. I got to turn. Yeah, hi. I'm glad to be here. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. We can't see you anymore. You had your camera on before, but anyway.
Okay.
Perhaps we'll come back, Jeff, if you want to say anything more a bit later, then you're welcome. But Robert,
yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, thanks.
Should we have a quick introduction now you've arrived, Jeff?
I'm sorry, I just turned off the speaking. I'm sorry, just a quick intro of myself, you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm kind of like what you call in England, I'm in New Jersey, okay? You call a pensioner, but I'm not a pensioner, not with this climate stuff. We all get rattled, it's like, anyway, just a quick thing. I've been following this, actually, like, starting really seriously about 2008, but not super serious. And I was big on, first thing was, I wasn't even thinking about reflecting back then. I was thinking about CDR. That was a big thing. I was big on CDR. And then actually it took about a year and a half ago, I was starting to look at about the what Hansen calls the energy imbalance. And yeah, that's right. The numbers just don't add up. I mean, it's scary. And then I'm thinking, we're never going to catch up with the CDR while every feedback loop and tipping point is going to be breached. So anyway, what I do right now, I'm working on writing something. It's kind of like a fiction. It's called Earth Also Rises. It's like, sun also rises. And I got all kinds of characters in there, and it's about reflection. And one of the takeaways, actually, the title is Earth Also Rises, or it's like Dr. Strangelove, or how we learn to reflect, forgive, and share Earth forward. Anyway, I got all the domains and stuff, and I also even got a Dr. Strange Care. I took that out,
character, and he's got a project Nucano. He's talking about, like when if we start heating up like crazy, nuke a volcano. And the code name is, the turtles doing the backstroke. That's when to do it. All kinds of crazy stuff. Anyway, 2 phrases come out of there. Reflect, baby, reflect. Cap, baby, cap. And this is in response to drill, baby, drill. Okay, that's about it. I could go on and on.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks for the introduction. I just wanted to check, Robert Hunziker, if you had anything you wanted to say right at the moment, or should we hear from some other people?
I'm sorry. One of the problems I've got on this call is for some of you, the words break up on my speaker. Now, the last speaker was very clear, but in your particular case, and also in John Nissen's, I have trouble. For some reason, the words are breaking up. I don't know why. Maybe I should reconnect.
Right. Are other people having trouble with my audio?
A little bit. It's not as clear as it could be, Robert.
Okay. Well,
easy to understand.
Okay, so Robert, I wanted to check if you had any comment in response to John Nissen or Jeff Suchon, and otherwise we can go to Jonathan Cole.
Yeah, go ahead and move on.
Jonathan.
Hi, Robert. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, back in 2014, when I changed careers into climate, I thought at any moment there was going to be a widespread panic of the population, and that the reason I jumped in was to develop home appliances that they could use to cool their house and try to do something, give them something to do with their hands so they could stop panicking. But of course, in the last 10 years, we've seen the opposite. We've seen general ignoring of everything. Every time we cross a tipping point, people go ho-hum. But do you think that there is a point where widespread panic might click in? Because it was kind of the foundation of my plans that I wanted to head that off. I thought that the civilization would harm itself more by panicking than it would by the actual temperature increase. So where do you stand on whether we'll switch from ignoring completely to panicking completely?
Well, where do I stand on that? It's well, that's such a judgmental, subjective call. It's impossible to really know. But I suppose what's going to happen, and here's what I think will happen, by the way, in response to your suggestion. I think that in due course, you're going to have some serious problems in Miami Beach. And they're already having problems. They've had to raise the streets along Miami Beach by 2 to 3 feet already. That's been done. And they still have problems with high tide, serious flooding in that area. They had a high rise, a 30-story high rise collapse about 3 or 4 years ago. That's right in that same vicinity. You get more and more of that and you will get panic, but then it's too late, isn't it? It's really too late when that happens. So I don't know that the panic mode, I don't know how many people on this call have seen the film Don't Look Up, but it's my favorite film to describe what's really happening in the world consciousness about global warming. It's the Leonardo DiCaprio film where he's an astrophysicist and he and his assistant have detected a major asteroid about to hit Earth. And so they go to all of the politicians, they go to the president of the United States and talk about it. And what happens is then the political side of the president who's running for office again, they adopt a motto or a message where all of their constituency don't look up, ignore it. And that's basically kind of the message of that film. And that's what the world's doing. They're not looking up. That film is a perfect metaphor for what's happening in the world today when it comes to the global warming crisis. And if I hadn't studied it as much as I've studied it, I would also think, well, gee, everything's fine here in Southern California. I don't sense a major problem encroaching upon my life. And I think that's the issue we've got. And so, yeah, I think when the panic comes, it's too late is my answer. My short answer is too late anyway. And I don't know, but maybe it's kind of too late right now in a way. I read some stuff by some people that makes it appear to me that I don't know what you can even do at this point to reverse this thing. And by the way, my question about the geoengineering is, do you have to just keep doing it? And how much money would be required? And what are the real logistics? How big of a project is this? It seems monumental to me. And it seems overwhelming to me. And is that wrong? Is it maybe not quite as overwhelming as I think? I don't know the answer to that.
I can give a very brief answer to kind of reassure you. There's been work done on refreezing the Arctic by a
Yes.
group including Doug McMahon. And they give a very detailed description of kind of what would be involved. You know, you'd have aircraft flying, have to fly above the tropopause, which is the boundary between the lower part of the atmosphere and the stratosphere above. And they would have to spread about 1 million tons of SO2 or a few million tons of SO2 each year for perhaps 10, 20 years. And the cost is quite reasonable. It's I can't remember what the exact figure was, but it's something like $20 billion per year.
20 billion?
Yeah,
20
20 billion a
billion?
year, which is nothing compared to the costs of climate change. So
Sure.
really the cost is not the issue. It's the politics of the
Yeah.
interjurisdictional communication and the politics of the aggressive hostility from the emission reduction alone ideology. So we've got this ideology that's essentially preventing cooling, which dominates the UN, and if the scientific community were able to change their view and get behind solar geoengineering, then it could happen very quickly. And I mean, my thought is that the main problem with stratospheric aerosol injection is that it requires interjurisdictional agreement, that because the stratosphere is inherently beyond national borders. And so the advantage of marine cloud brightening as a first technology is that it can be tested and deployed within a national jurisdiction. And so it has got the capacity to show the benefits of cooling. So I live in Australia, and so I'm advocating to the Australian government to switch its climate policy. But I think that we've got no hope that the political left will change its view, because they are just so totally suckered in by the emission reduction theory, which is like, I mean, emission reductions are great, but they're too small and slow to affect climate. And this is carbon is fixing the carbon problem is the long-term answer, but the short-term answer is fixing albedo. And the concept of albedo is forbidden in climate conversation. So there's there's some sort of religious anathema, and so it's very interesting to see the sort of religious psychology that's in operation, and very difficult to open a conversation about that. So finding the simple entry points. My view is that there's quite a groundswell of opposition to the emission reduction policies on grounds of expense and energy unreliability, and environmental damage. So I think that it's quite likely that people will quite quickly come to a view that it's important to recognize the role of albedo as the primary immediate lever that we have available. And yeah, so I'm quite hopeful about that, but as to whether there's grounds for optimism as to whether it's too late, certainly the leading marine cloud brightening scientists argue that global deployment of MCB could be enough to create a new ice age. So on your question of whether it would need to be permanent, my view is that once we start deploying MCB, and probably we will then be in a position to also deploy stratospheric aerosol injection, because people will see that its benefits just vastly outweigh its risks or harms. And then people will recognize that these technologies offer like a new vision of our global existence, that where we are actually able to regulate the climate, where we can regulate the rain and storms, and that is something that in the long term is good. And it will take like we've got 2.5 trillion excess tons of CO2 that's been added to the biosphere. And so 2.5 trillion tons is a massive, it'll take a long time. And I think that we'll need to work out how to convert that into useful stuff rather than just burying it, like geosequestration. Like, geosequestration would be the fastest thing, but like carbon's actually quite useful. And so if we can find things to do with carbon that are useful while we address the temperature problem with albedo, then that's my hope.
What does it take then, in your opinion, to coalesce the scientific community around this issue? What does it take to coalesce that? What would have to happen? How would you go about that?
I think what will be needed is that conservative political parties will will recognize that climate change is a real problem and that denial is not a viable policy. It's too unpopular. And they will find that if they advocate for using albedo as the solution, while if they take the view that using albedo is a substitute for emission reduction, then it will be possible to. And now the fact is that albedo is not a substitute scientifically, and so that's why the scientific community has been so hostile to any action on albedo whatsoever. On the fear that it would lead to exactly this thing, that conservatives would pick it up and would say, "Oh, great, let's increase albedo and we'll be fine." Now it's not enough, but it is essential, and so I think that the lever will be within the conservative side of politics rather than the progressive side. But that's something that's anathema to the progressive side, because there's this just sort of general demonization of conservative politics. And so you've got this, the whole situation is stymied. There's no path forward because nobody's willing to engage with conservative political parties and say, why don't you get behind geoengineering? That's my opinion.
Yeah. What is the, you mentioned that there's a group or somebody who's saying it'll tip you into a new ice age. Is that what you said?
Not it will, it could. Like if it's quite possible to deploy sufficient marine cloud brightening to create a new ice age. Like our climate's really very fragile and sensitive. And if we deployed 1,000 MCV ships and put them on full bore, then that would be enough to make a new ice age. Whereas if we just deployed 50, then it would be enough to stabilize the climate at Holocene levels. So
I do need to point out to Robert.
This sounds like a very sensitive formula to me, or something. It sounds to me like
a subject of.
As a layperson with this, it sounds like it's too sensitive.
Yeah, Robert isn't speaking for the whole group. he's speaking from his personal view. As chair of the group, I try and put an even keel on this. Marine cloud brightening has huge benefits, but there is some doubt from the maths that it can produce the amount of cooling that we think also from maths is required. So I've been looking at trying to find out how much cooling is required for the Arctic. And if it's the figure that rough estimate of the figure, the Arctic is warming, it's contributing to global warming by the equivalent of 25 to 50 years of CO2 emissions. So it's having a huge effect on the energy imbalance of the planet. It also has the tipping points. So the tipping points, the academics say the tipping points are yet to be activated. In fact, they've all been activated already. So there's an absolute lie going on in the academic community about the tipping points in the Arctic. Did you hear me clearly on that, Robert?
Yes, I did. I did hear you
Yeah,
clearly on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And discussion of tipping points and so forth. You're saying that in your view, they've already been activated, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, then if isn't the definition of a tipping point, no looking back? Once you get there, you're there and.
Right. So
Right.
the tipping point definition in the academic circles is that there's an activation of the tipping point is manifest from positive feedback. So once you get an acceleration of some parameter, like the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, if that's accelerating and there's a sign of some kind of feedback, then that's a tipping point has been activated.
There's
And
no
then,
going back if we just use carbon, but if we use albedo,
so,
then we can go
yeah.
back. But so we've got these tipping elements in play, and they can be reversed with higher albedo, but just by emission reduction we can't reverse them.
No, and now the other thing that the academic people say is the point of no return. It is, if you took that, then the point of no return, as they would define it, without cooling intervention, those have all been passed. If we don't start cooling the thing, all the tipping points are beyond the point of no return.
Now we've got a couple of other people who wanted to speak, John. So let's. Okay, you just finished that one, and then we'll go on to others.
Terribly important that Robert understands how misleading the academic community is being on behalf of the world's future.
Do you think that, by the way, do you think James Hansen is one of the people who's not misleading people? He's leading them properly?
He's under this dreadful taboo that you have with academics. They get so much hostility if they mention the word geoengineering or even something less climate intervention or something, that they just don't. They know they would either lose their job if they've got a job, or they lose all their followers. So Hansen is very gentle about it, but he's absolutely clear that some kind of cooling is going to be required. So I think he's really on our side, so to speak.
So but he's in favor of it. But here's my question for you though, the big question I have. So you geoengineer the Arctic. What about Antarctica then?
Needs to be balanced. And
The balance?
there's
yeah,
also the,
you probably have to do that as well. It's just that the Arctic is more immediately urgent, and we have the figures for the Arctic. We don't have yet the figures for how much cooling we need in the Antarctic.
now let's go on to others. So now, Herb, you had your hand up for a while, but you've taken it down. Did you want to speak?
Yes, thanks, Robert.
Thanks. I'm sure glad I
Doug,
read that article.
Doug, just hang on. Herb was first. He's taken his hand down, but he did have his hand up earlier. So sorry. Do you mind if I go to Herb first?
Sure,
Sorry,
go ahead.
Doug. Go
Okay,
ahead,
I think there'll be plenty of time. Thanks. It's really a pleasure to meet you, Robert Hunziker, in person, quote unquote. And I just wanted to take a minute to explain. There's a kind of ecosystem of advocates for cooling, including the folks here at Prague, and there's another group, and we have a lot of overlapping membership, called the Healthy Planet Action Coalition. And you actually did, and I'm sure you remember, but many of the folks here may not remember, you did a wonderful article on our work. I just checked again back in September of 2022, where you basically said monumental plans for climate intervention or something like that. And you know, the sort of, I don't want to emphasize so much the differences between our groups because we have much more in common, but our group, and I say our HPAC, is really much more agnostic in terms of what techniques may or may not work. And it really focuses on the critical need for cooling of some sort and for the world community to come together in some way through some set of institutions, whether it's the UN or the G20 or through the COPs or the IPC, you know, all these institutions and agencies to urgently, objectively, comprehensively, and equitably evaluate all of these proposed techniques, determine what additional knowledge is necessary before decisions for deployment are made, and ultimately, of course, to recommend them to be deployed in the context of what we talk about as climate restoration, with the goal of actually bringing temperatures back down to well below 1 degree C over the coming decades or so. So that's sort of our perspective, but it's, you know, it's very much in line with what's proposed here and elsewhere. And a third article that you did, which was just a couple of months ago, was on the paper by another one of our colleagues, Graham Taylor, Peter Wadhams. Those folks are involved with us, and their paper about what was it called, bad science and good attitudes or something like that. That was done to help with the goal of trying to influence the discourse at the Dubai COP. So I just sort of wanted to put that out, and I hope you'll stay in touch with all of us because we're grandiose enough to think that the folks here really do have a viable set of potential solutions that the conventional climate world doesn't have, for all the reasons discussed here and that you've articulated in your wonderful articles. And just before I go back to Doug or give it back to him, just in terms of climate communication, I'm wondering whether you're a member of the Society of Environmental Journalists. I just joined. I was able to get approved because I'm an author of a book on climate, A Climate Vocabulary of the Future, and I see they organize various panels and so forth. And if you are a member, I know I don't, you know, you may have more contacts or influence because of your many years working in this than I do, whether it might be possible to organize a panel. I'm sure, I know it's too late for this year's conference, which is in April, but you know, bringing this issue to the forefront of the environmentally journalistic community. So I'll just stop there.
That was a wonderful explanation. Thank you. You straightened out a lot of things for me in my mind. I really appreciate that. That's great. And no, I'm not a member, by the way. I'm not. I'm
Well,
very
it's
much
only $40.
Okay, great.
might want to
I know.
join.
It's easy to join some of these things. But the thing I guess, one of the things I'm trying to wrap my mind around, and that is, uh, how to really get the message out to make it stick and make it work. Make it work. I want to be pragmatic about it. And so that what needs to happen to make this work? What buttons have to be pushed to make this work? Who do we have to direct something towards? Does it have to be the UN? Does it have to be, or does it have to be John Kerry? Or, I think you need to have the rubber meet the road somehow, because there's a lot of theory and understanding and things like that, but that rubber has to meet the road and to make it grind ahead and move ahead. And I don't see where that's out there right now, other than we're talking as a little symposium here. And I understand the gravity of the problem, but who do you have to get to in your view? And I'll try to get to them if you tell me who it is.
Well,
I do
I would
have a
I
lot of
would just
interest.
go back and I would just go back and say again, I really would urge you to maybe join the SEJ that not as an exclusive avenue, but to begin to get this on the agendas of your colleagues who are not writing about this. And it's almost impossible for those of us who've reached out to the journalistic community, with the exception of the wonderful open-mindedness that you have towards this stuff, to get mainstream communication media to seriously talk about cooling, and that's part of this. Robert talked about it. There is this kind of taboo, or I call it in my book a media omerta, or code of silence about this, and that's not the only thing that needs to happen. But I think that until that happens, it'll be very difficult to get momentum with these other groups. But I mean, the glib answer to your question is all of the above. I mean, and those of us in these groups, through our various contacts, have attempted to reach out to John Kerry. Doug Grant who's speaking next, has been trying to reach out to Bill McKibben, Michael Mann, all sorts of people like that to break the
Bernie
ice,
Sanders.
and and so forth. So it's it's a longer discussion than just today, and it's one we spent a lot of our time pulling our hair out getting across, and I hope we can continue this dialogue to brainstorm together on it.
Right.
So let's move on to Doug.
Okay, that's a great segue, Herb. I appreciate it. And the segue from Robert's comment about what buttons to push to get some rubber on the road. As he knows, I was really impressed with his article in Presenza, and it's called "Too Much Heat, Past and Present." I thought it was beautiful the way you started out with the general history and then worked into the Hansen-Mann debate. And I'll make a quick statement about how I think the new climate war, which Mann has written about, is actually between Hansen and Mann, or between the people that say all we have to do is reduce emissions versus Hansen's latest prognostication. So let's talk about audience. I've been talking to audiences through my presentations and writing letters and visiting and getting arrested with Jane Fonda, for God's sake, and none of that worked for 10 years. And you've been working on it since 1988, and that hasn't worked. And we have another fellow who's been working on something, and it hasn't worked. So I keep coming back to who's the audience. You have an audience. Bill McKibben has an audience. I'm going to mention a cousin who just recently moved from Nebraska to Phoenix, since John mentioned Phoenix. And life is wonderful, and they're taking their kids ice skating lessons and car racing. What do you call them? Those little cars that drive around the track and everything. Everything's wonderful, and their teenagers are growing. That is not the audience, in my opinion. They were oblivious to what we're trying to work on here. So I keep coming back to, I want to ask you, who's the right audience? But I think, and I wrote you in a comment here, that I think if we could somehow bridge the gap to Michael Mann, who's friends with Bill McKibben, who's friends with Naomi Oreskes and Klein and all the rest of and Mark Hertzgaard and all the rest of them who hate to mention the word geoengineering, if somehow we could, I don't want to use the word discredit or undermine. Now, of course, Michael Mann is sitting on a pedestal now. You can't dethrone him. He just won $1 million, $1,000,001. So
Yeah.
my question to you is, we all have different audiences. How do we, and you've posed it, this is John Kerry? I don't think so. I think we somehow need to become friends with Michael Mann. And he's blocked me. I can't even see his posts. I can, but I have a different account on Twitter. He's blocked me from Twitter, as Herb knows. Anyway, I'm just looking for your advice. Put you in a hot seat.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah.
And maybe you don't have an answer, and maybe that'll come through time. But
Is the question you mean? Is the question you're to me, to the audience, that we need to address? Is that what your question is?
I mean, you're asking the same question.
Yeah, I'm asking you the question. Now you're asking me back. So
we're in a circle.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
it is a circle.
There was some suggestion made by Mike McCracken that we might find a UN body, a suitable one, and he's suggesting there's a UN advisory body on sustainable development. And we could point out you can't have sustainable development in a world that's going crazy with tipping points and so on, getting hotter and hotter. So they might take up.
Well, I think the UN's a lost cause, but so we still had hands up from Robert and earlier from Rebecca.
Robert, don't just dismiss me like that. I think Mike has a very sensible suggestion there, which we ought to think about. It probably is the only UN body apart from the president himself, Guterres. He's seeing the future. He said that he sees the future as a global boiling. So he's the man perhaps we should go to.
Antonio Guterres.
Yeah.
I would think so. Who has an entree to Antonio Guterres?
Yeah.
If they do, they need to pick up the phone and call him.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, the barriers are just too high. While there's.
Do you know how to do that, Robert?
I might be able to get through to him. I'll try.
Yeah.
I'll try to get through to him.
Yeah.
And tell him that we want to have a Zoom call with him. I'll work on it.
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
That'd be brilliant.
Yeah, I might be able to do that.
And UNEP has also done some useful work, and there's been a range of publications, but there hasn't really been any effort to get the sort of argument that you've been presenting, Robert, into the mainstream media. And my feeling is that until there's some sort of breaking of that barrier within, like, for example, the Murdoch press, I think is possible, and just other, mass circulation newspapers or television. I don't think I've ever seen anybody advocate cooling the planet on television. And there's been the occasional radio interview, but I was able to have a radio interview, but I tried to get follow-up and no interest in it. But do you mind if we just go back to the other people who've had their hands up for a while? Sure. Okay, so Rebecca was first. She's got her hand down now, but did you want to speak, Rebecca? If you want to unmute.
Thank you. Robert, thank you very much for your work and bringing it into mainstream or alternative journalism, at least where there's excellent coverage, and you as Herb said, written about some of this work for a while now. If we are lucky enough to get an audience or a Zoom call with Mr. Gutierrez, I don't know whether it should be an open call or a subgroup with some of the HPAC Healthy Planet Action Coalition executive and a few people from this call. But I think it's very important that it's presented in terms of what we call the climate triad, which is the need for cooling and removing and reducing, cooling the planet, removing carbon that's already up there, which is what James Hansen talks about, the cooling in the pipeline or the large amount of carbon that's up there, with continued efforts to remove carbon from, reduce carbon emissions. But as Robbie has said, the reason that there's, apart from emotional and kind of belief, this is what I've done all my life, my climate change life, and it's hard to change your worldview, the thought that possibly cooling the planet is going to stop efforts or take focus away from reducing, that's the kind of policy barrier that people bring up. And I think if that was the focus, the need for cooling, the second issue is how can that be done? And you've heard a bit of the debate here, which is very scientific, between different methods. As Herb says, there's a lot of different ways of doing it, but the two ones that seem to be closest to actual deployment or field testing are marine cloud brightening and stratospheric aerosol injection. And there are pros and cons for both of them. And I think it's important that it doesn't deteriorate into a kind of he said, she said thing in the meeting with Mr. Gutierrez. And just on that point, even the question of how much cooling is needed hasn't been established by scientists, and what is the effectiveness of either marine cloud brightening or stratospheric aerosol injection. So it's very easy for it to become technical and looking like an argument when in fact most of us are on the same page, or if there are differences, they're things that probably shouldn't be aired in the public view. So my final quick thing is that when people say, we had an eminent meteorologist speaking to us who said that marine cloud brightening might be enough or would have the power enough to bring another ice age. And whenever anyone here quotes that, I get nervous because it's the headline that people hear, oh gosh, we're going to have another ice age. And what he was actually meaning was what Robert said, Robbie Tulip, is that it would be strong enough to do that. So anyway, it's quite hard getting nuances. And personally, I think that the nature-based solution of, there's quite a few of them around with ocean iron fertilization and all these other things, but what probably will have the easiest breakthrough is something that is nature-based and that can be done in a certain jurisdiction, as Robbie was saying. And you might be able to tell that I'm in the rebrightening project group with Robbie, and I'm certainly supportive of stratospheric aerosol injection, but I just think everywhere I go in the climate movement, people go, nya, nasty, nasty. And so it's a sort of a strategic sequencing question as well as a scientific one. And I don't know if you have any comments about that, but I just wanted to share that bit of context.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. That was really helpful. And I understand everything you said. And yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, so James Hansen commented that marine cloud brightening would be the most innocuous starting point in his global warming in the pipeline paper. And the issue about the sort of ice age question is that all of these technologies would start close to a homeopathic dose, and there would be a strong governance arrangement that would overview the science internationally. And the effects of a very small, the response to a very small dose would be assessed so that we can step away from the precipice of tipping points, but not step over the precipice of inducing a new ice age. Now, Kim Stanley Robinson, he I think quite he speculated in his book 2312 about using geoengineering to create a new ice age and that wrecking the Earth. So that sort of conversation is out there, but it's simply not realistic. The realistic conversation is that you start with amounts that are so small that you can absolutely tell what the climate impact is, and it's so far from the amount that would be needed for an ice age, especially when we're headed in the opposite direction. We need to stop ourselves going over the edge in the other direction rather than that sort of speculation. So let's turn to Robert. Chris.
Very interesting conversation. This kind of illustrates to me or highlights to me the sort of the core issues that we're all facing. So to me, there are two fundamental questions. The first is, and many of you have heard me say these things before, but since this is Robert H's introduction to the group, in a way, I'll share them again. But the first question is, do we have the capacity, the technical ability to intervene in some way to avert widespread societal collapse in the coming decades? And the answer to that question, and I don't need to labor that point in this group, it's almost certainly yes that we do. And it's also, I would go so far as to say, almost certainly true that we've always had the power to do that. So the issue is not whether we've got the technical, intellectual, engineering expertise to create these solutions, if you want to use the word solution, to climate change. That is not the question. That's pretty straightforward. The second question is, do we have the communal wit to develop and deploy these activities on a timely and effective basis? And that is where all our problems lie. It's got nothing, our issues are nothing to do with the technology. They're basically engineering problems that a bunch of bright guys, some of whom are on this call, and there are many others out there, can solve pretty quickly if they're given the right kind of financial and technical support. But the social license questions and the political questions and the economic questions are of a completely different order and nature and scale and extent. And they are where we have repeatedly, continuously, almost unerringly failed. Mm-hmm. So the third question that leads on from that is, if we have established such a blindingly consistently awful track record on these sets of questions, what is the evidence that there is something new happening that's going to change direction? Because just like Newton's, was it second law of whatever it was, that something will carry on traveling in the same direction at the same speed until you exert a force on it, and that will change its direction or change its velocity, whatever. So we're headed in this direction. We've been going. What is going to change it? What is on the horizon that is visible even that we change that? And again, I won't go into this now because it's late and we've had a lot of this, but I see nothing, absolutely nothing here that has the slightest indication that it has either the timeliness or the scale to turn the dial on these political and social issues. So effectively, we're headed in this direction, and we're going to carry on going in this direction, and the system is going to collapse, and it will collapse.
Okay, well, earlier on this, maybe before you arrived, Robert, I did say that I think things have changed.
We've listened to you. We've listened to you a great deal this evening, and I would be grateful if you would give me a moment to finish what I'm saying. Thank you very much.
You're just contradicting something I said earlier, that's all.
Right, well, when I've finished, you can come in and you can respond to it. But it's unhelpful for the other people on the call for to interrupt, because you can't listen to two conversations at the same time. So I see nothing here that is going to change the direction. And the problem is, it's something that you touched on earlier, Robert, and that is the don't look up thing. Unfortunately, you asked a question about what has to happen for this to be different. And the answer to your question is a lot of rich people have got to die in very unpleasant circumstances and or lose their wealth and power over a short period of time for the rest of the people in that group to wake up and say, oh my God, we have really got a problem here. We better act, because the central problem is that everybody is looking for a solution, a way out that will minimize harm. Everybody wants an orderly exit. There is no orderly exit to the problem that we have created over the last 200 or 300 years. There are going to be winners, there are going to be a lot of losers. And if your focus is on avoiding any losers, then you are not ever going to achieve anything. You're not going to do anything that's going to be effective. And that is the core of the problem. And so long as the forces of conservation, and these are not the conservative right that Robert was talking about, this is a different use of the term, as long as the people that are focused on conserving their wealth and their power and their influence are focused on conserving those things, we are simply going to be driving in the same direction, because that's what's driven us here and that's what's carried us forward. So when you are thinking about who is the audience and what's the message that we've got to get across, somehow the only way to rescue this situation is to get those people to look up now, before the shit hits the fan.
Bravo.
Yeah.
Bravo. Yeah, you're right.
John,
Okay, I just wanted to.
John,
I just wanted to correct the one thing
has a response.
that things
quickly.
do have changed. As I said earlier, things have changed in the last couple of years. We do have parts of the US that could become uninhabitable, and even in Canada, as a result of what's happening. So, in a sense, we have hit the fan. The shit has hit the fan, and we need to build on that. Okay, you've got to get people to look up and see that this is happening. So Robert's right in that you've got to get people to look up.
Absolutely.
But I think things have got so bad now that it's become visible, at least for people who've got reasonable eyesight.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because I hear from people, like you heard from someone in Phoenix. Were you saying that, John? You had someone in Phoenix, or who was saying that?
My son Edwin lived there for yeah.
Yeah, and they're just happy as can be. They're doing just fine. Yeah, and I kind of get that same kind of message from people who say, "Oh, gee, these articles that you're writing." I agree. It's just it's a doomsday world, and I don't know what to do, but I'll just carry on with life and talk to you later. See you around. I mean, that's kind of what comes across with people, and they do have to live their lives, don't they? They have to live your everyday life. But the issue is coalescing. It's coalescing this message around a source that can do something. And is it Antonio Guterres? Is he the best shot to do this? I mean, he's the one that said we're headed for a boiling earth. I mean, he said that.
Can I just add something on Guterres? I had quite a close relationship with David King last year, discussing a project that I was keen to, and others were keen to progress. And he had been in touch with Guterres precisely on this topic. Guterres is not going to make anything happen. The UN is a completely bankrupt. It is a completely busted flush. And Guterres, if Guterres,
that's a non-starter.
Total non-starter. And none of the constituent parts of the UN are going to do anything other than continue to indulge in their own internal bureaucracy and their own self-serving activities. And if Guterres, who speaks, I mean, he tells a good story. I'm not saying he doesn't understand the issues. He probably understands them better than most. But if he had the power to do what we would like him to do, he'd have done it already. He'd be setting that up. And the fact is that he is as crippled as the rest of us are, because the forces that are lined up against him, and this is a global problem. Remember, it's not just about what's happening in Europe or in the US, it's everywhere. And everywhere has got a slightly different take on it. They've got slightly different pressures, they've got slightly different opportunities. And this is actually something else that kind of, which I won't go into a detail, but it kind of cropped up in the last 24 hours. I'm horrified, absolutely horrified by the number of people, and this is particularly a problem in the US, who see climate change as a profit opportunity. I mean,
Oh,
just, yeah, I mean, it just, that mindset is just, you know, it's completely, it's mind-boggling, you know.
That's very
Climate
true.
climate change is not a profit opportunity, guys.
Yeah.
You know?
So maybe what you really need to do, though, is kind of the rulers of the world are the people, the billionaires, right? Not Antonio Guterres, it's the billionaires. They rule the world, don't they? No? Isn't that the way things are set up? Seems to me I call it high-end capitalism, and it's so obvious, it just slaps you right in the face. So then where we have to really direct our attention is we have to go to some billionaires and get them to come on side.
The thing about the billionaires and the family offices, they have the power and the capacity to initiate stuff. They can they can get things to start, but they don't have the resources or the means, political means, social means, to continue these things at the scale that is necessary over the decades. Yeah? That's not really, they could, if they wanted to, use some of their billions now, move these issues forward very rapidly. Not only on the technology, that's important, but they could really, really put some of that money into addressing the social license issues and extending the understanding, the point that Rebecca was making. You know, just get to base one, explain to people why emissions reductions alone, intervening in the carbon cycle, is no longer sufficient. If you could just get that point across,
yeah.
And then the geoengineering stuff kind of follows automatically. You're going down the slide then. That's easy. But the first point is, and people won't listen at the moment because they are still wedded to this now busted notion that we can sort this problem by really, really, really working, you know, extra hard on emissions reductions and greenhouse gas removal. It's just complete nonsense. But that's the position that the orthodox many are taking. That's the IPCC's position. That's most governments' positions. That's many NGOs' positions. That's many activist positions. You know, the folk like you've got on this call and the people that we become associated with, we're still, you know, a very small group.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Shall we move on to Jeff Sachon?
Yeah, hi. Okay. By the way, it's Sushan.
Sushan, I'm sorry.
Sushan when I was in Paris, that's for sure. I loved it. But it's actually a Polish name. It's funny. Okay, I just have a few notes because this is a very good conversation. I like the dialogue and the share. That's beautiful. And I just have, you know, stuff I have like some addendums to a few things that were said. Is that okay?
Yep, that's better.
Yep.
Okay. First of all, I always want to start off everything like one of the problems we have, like with the solar geoengineering, I took out soulgeneer, like soldiers, but soulgeneer is what Hansen said is so true. Is, you know, people say we're doing some artificial or something by trying to fix this climate stuff. That's, you know, it's kind of like we already geoengineered this mess. We're actually trying to fix it. It's, you know, it's like you guys say, oh, let nature take care of it. We're going to burn up if we do that. I mean, this is nothing that was done in a normal Earth time. So anyway, that's one message I think it's really got to get out there. You got to hear it more often because they're saying that's not natural. Let nature do it. But what we've already done is not natural. We've already messed it up more than we're going to help it. Okay, anyway, that's one thing I try getting that point across to people. We've already geoengineered the world into this fiasco. We're taking a different route. I just want to, with Robert Hunziker, he was talking about Miami. I love Miami. I love North Miami. But anyway, I was reading today that in some legislation, they're trying to take the phrase climate change out of the law. They're going back a big time.
Yep.
Okay, another thing. Right now, like even as Earth heats up, and we know the albedo we're losing, We've already lost so much. There's some that's doable. I love MCB. That seems like a win-win-win across the board. But right now, what we could do, I think more of, big time, is I belong to Mir. The surface reflectors and paint it white, that kind of stuff, especially urbanly. Who knows what's going to happen? On the this coming up summer in our every summer everywhere anyway. We see what's happening. Okay, everything's rolling over. And I want to say, I look at reflecting as an antipyretic. Like if you got a virus or a bacteria, you got an infection, the fever can kill you first. You got to treat the fever. Okay. Oh, by the way, just right now is what I'm writing is, you talk about Tony Gutierrez. I call him Tony Lots of Guts. And with James Hansen, I call him Iowa Bandson. He's from cow tipping country. That's another story. And you talk about the bankers and all that kind of stuff running. I have a chapter called Pour and Peace. Pour it out and by pieces. Okay, but anyway, another thing I want to say about getting the message out. I love let me go into, I love the stuff like what Greta did. I call her Great Expectations. But not only what Greta did, make sunsets. They're not messing up they're doing next to nothing. But you know what? You see it all over the news. People are wondering, what the hell is that? What's it actually do? That's what we need more of. I've already gone out. I'm Reflecto Man. I'm going out with foil. And I have this umbrella shaped hat I got from, what's that called? Timu or in China and stuff, but it's reflective. And the idea is reflecting sunlight. And I got foil to put over myself and everything. But it's kind of like you do the shock and awe. They'll think you're a nut, but then questions go out there. You got to step out, okay? You got to knock on the doors. If you don't knock on the door, nobody's going to open it. I mean, that's where I come from.
Jeff, let's move on. I just checked, Robert Hunziker. Have you got any comment on Jeff's points? Otherwise,
well, I think the Making Sunsets is interesting, by the way, because they're out there actually doing this in a very small way. But at one point they had contacted me, and this was early on, and I didn't really get involved with them, but I don't know what kind of impact that's had, but there is that group, and they are actually doing this on a very limited scale in the Southwest United States. And there's been a lot of criticism about it.
They got a pretty severe. Did you see the article in Time magazine?
No. What did they say?
They said they're a pack of druggy losers.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, I haven't followed up on it. Yeah.
No, that was interesting. We had quite a good chat with the Making Sunsets guys, Luke Iceman. Yeah. Can we move on to Herb?
Yeah, just a quick comment about Making Sunsets. I mean, one of the consequences is they got Mexico to declare a moratorium on this stuff. So I'm not sure that's all that productive. But moving on from that, I want to make 3 quick points. First, ironically, when you talked about Robert, Don't Look Up, I don't know if I don't remember who else, anybody from this group was involved, but I don't know, some months ago, I was, along with 10 other folks, invited to a number of sort of off the record meetings with someone who was working for Adam McKay, who is the producer of that show, of that movie, and has produced all sorts of very popular Hollywood films and so forth. And we were trying to get across the triad to him, and I don't think we've succeeded, but we're actually trying to, I hope it'll still happen, that we can have some kind of direct influence on McKay, because he's a real hawk on climate, not only through the film, but his Yellow Dot Studios, they do great visuals and stories and videos. And if we could get him to support cooling would make and his connections in Hollywood and around the world are extraordinary. So if you're looking strategically, who do you want to influence? And you want a list of, on one hand, 4 or 5 people, I would certainly put him up there as one of those 4 or 5 to get to. With regard to strategic approach, what I've been focused on, well, here or there, I mean, not regularly, but my local congressman here, I live just outside of Washington, D.C., is Jamie Raskin, who is the only congressman to actually introduce a climate restoration resolution some years ago. And I have some contacts with him, and I'm very close to setting up a meeting with him. And the goal is to get him on our side and to have him use his influence. To me, the most critical leverage possibility that I see is to be able to influence the people around Biden with the hope that if he is victorious, that in a second term, he has nothing to lose, no political consequences. It would be, literally a world-changing legacy to get him to be able to support cooling and announce an initiative right after he's inaugurated. And, my approach is to try to go at him through Jamie Raskin. Time will tell whether that's successful, or whether, obviously, nothing is a panacea. But to me, that's the most high leverage thing I can think of. And the third, the third gets to the idea of lobbying billionaires. I've had this simple idea for years now, and I think that's again an absolute key. There are literally thousands of billionaires now. You have dozens and dozens of billionaires that have signed up for the Bill Gates's Giving Pledge, where they commit to donating half their resources either before or after they pass on or so. And if I had a couple $100,000 or whatever, or the organizational ability, what I would do is organize a small group of what do they call them now? I'm blanking on it. The advancement officers, the people who raise money for the Harvards and the big museums, the opera houses and the symphonies, who raise hundreds of millions of dollars and who know how to create dossiers on every potential philanthropist. I would set up a team of 2 or 3 dedicated advancement officials focused on these billionaires, finding out what their strong points and weaknesses are to get them to donate not just their money, but their political influence, their managerial skills, et cetera, et cetera. So those are sort of been my ideas that I've had for quite a while, to leverage, whether it's a president, whether it's a major Hollywood producer, or whether it's billionaires, people with real power and influence. You only need a handful of them to start.
Yeah, that's a great idea. John Whitehouse is another good example. Senator Whitehouse. He gives an annual speech to the Senate about what's happening with the climate every year, like a 2-hour speech every year. His wife is huh?
I was going to say, he's amazing. I had the opportunity. I happened to be in Cambridge, Mass, when he was giving a talk at MIT a couple of years ago. And I went to it was MIT, so they had a fancy cocktail reception afterwards. And somehow I wound up at a standing cocktail table, just he and I, for 25 minutes or so. And I tried to push some of the cooling stuff, but I mean, he's an idol of mine. He's a critical person. If we could get him on the cooling side, that would be an extraordinary, influential action.
And you know that he's not on the cooling side?
He's not yet. Now, I don't know how much of it is. I think I've looked at, I think some of it is active. I think it's partly this moral hazard stuff. But I could check to see his writings. I mean, he hates the fossil fuel company. His big thing is some of you may or may know, is the influence of dark money. And, what he was telling me, and he said this publicly also, he is so scornful of the so-called liberal corporations, the Apples and the technology in Hollywood that ostensibly support climate. But when it comes to their financial interests, they'll give money to elect Republicans who are anti-climate if they can get a tax break on their next in the next piece of legislation. But
Absolutely.
that's all behind the scenes, whereas the commercials are all positive, and then they do their dirty work, but where no one can see it except people like White House.
Yeah, he's one of the few. Yeah.
I'd like to make a general point here that practically in every case, a problem is that people think that that SRM, i.e. geoengineering, is highly dangerous, high risk, and they fear it, and it's quite a strong emotional gut feeling against interfering with the system, but they just don't believe that it can be done in a benign way. So we needed quite a lot of education, and it's quite extraordinary that people who've actually looked at it can still say it's highly dangerous. People like Ken Caldera believe that it's dangerous. The gut feel it must be dangerous, though I can't find anything, any reason for it to be dangerous.
Yeah, there's such an extraordinary amount of spec. Go on, Robert. Robert, were you speaking?
No. I was just going to say, I think he's at MIT, right? Ken Caldera?
No, he's at Cornell.
Cornell?
He's MIT, I think.
He's at Carnegie, I think.
Carnegie, right.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
That's right, Carnegie,
yeah.
Right.
Now I wanted to introduce another topic, which is the security community. And like with the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, there's quite a strong narrative out there, which is that that's the real problem facing the world, just stopping wars, and that climate is just a sort of luxurious distraction. Now, the reality is that climate change is the biggest security risk, and it's an amplifier of the risk of war and conflict, and so that's. But the trouble is that people observe that cutting emissions doesn't have any effect on temperature, and so they say it's this. What's the point of it? So what I would really like to see is targeting of some of the foreign policy, foreign affairs, security community journals, magazines, with an argument about the security dimension of cooling, and I have a feeling that could be very influential. I tried to reach out to the security leaders for climate change here in Australia, but once again, they're completely obsessed by emission reduction, and were just unwilling to give to countenance the idea that that albedo needs to be taken into account in cooling policy. So the Hill is another one, but some of these foreign affairs I think would be like part of the problem with Counterpunch is that it just gets automatically dismissed as just a commo rag. And so, people just say, well, whatever's in there, it doesn't matter because it's Counterpunch, and so it's sorry to be rude, but it's like the question of who does it influence, what does it influence? It's like great stuff, but it's for an audience of people who are have a shared worldview.
Right. That's right. Yeah. You're speaking to the choir.
Although the Counterpunch choir is converted to the need to cut emissions and oppose the fossil fuel industry. They're not converted to cooling. So it's an interesting question how much your articles in Counterpunch have had an influence. Like you said that you'd received quite a bit of correspondence. And do you find that correspondence is is positive about what you're writing?
Yes, yes, I do. Very much so. Yeah. Yeah, I do. And especially in the academic community, really very positive in the academic community, the responses I get. But just overall, yes, they're in agreement.
That's great, because they're not speaking out publicly. You know, there's lots of academics who are willing to send a private email, but won't put their voice to it publicly. We usually finish at the half hour, so let's just have a final comment from Rebecca, and then just a wind up from John Nissen.
Hi, my comment's very brief. It's about, pardon me, the policy situation in the UK. There's a group called the Advanced Research Innovation Agency, and there's a Professor Mark Symes up at Glasgow University, and his whole funding program is premised on the fact that we need responsible climate intervention, he calls it. So I mainly wanted to say that that is not widely out in the open. I really think it's great that we've been talking about public consciousness and influencers and billionaires and that kind of thing, but the fact that there's a ARIA, it's called, is premised on that, and he's trying to find out how can we responsibly intervene. To me, that's the first thing that I'm aware of where there's a government initiative, even though it's sort of quiet in the background, that talks about the need for climate intervention, engineering.
Thanks, Rebecca.
What's the name of that again?
ARIA, Advanced Research Innovation Agency, and there's about 15 different work programs, and one of them is on the climate. There's actually another fascinating one on measuring the climate, which is to do with lights, and I think it's a different area. But Mark Symes, he's a professor of electrical engineering at Glasgow University.
Yeah, great.
And he's very supportive of MCB. I'm not sure about others, but yeah.
I'll put the link in the chat. Now, Jeff, Sushant, do you have a quick comment?
Yes, I just have one thing to say. The big thing, the politics is politics. But going with Joe Biden, we hope, hopefully he gets reelected. And since it was mentioned, he's got nothing to lose. It's his last term. He should give, like Kennedy gave, a moonshot speech, a cooler speech. Within this decade, we'll start their cooling. We could do that with MCB and SAI. Just get the ball rolling. Okay, that's it. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jeff. Robert, any final comment?
No, well, yeah, my only final comment is I really, really appreciate this opportunity, and I feel reasonably well connected with what you're trying to do and would like to stay in touch. So thanks.
Thanks so much for joining us, John.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Robert. You've helped to stimulate a lot of discussion. I hope some of it was enlightening. As I said before, one of the common things is that people imagine this stuff is highly dangerous, and so why on earth would you do it? So we've got to, I think, not only persuade people that we've got to do it, but we've also got to persuade them the means we have to do it is actually quite pretty benign. In fact, people who've investigated haven't really found anything, any kind of very serious problem with marine cloud brightening or stratospheric aerosol injection. It may come down to a matter of the maths, which can produce enough cooling power. And as I said, the cooling power for the Arctic is horrendous requirement. So that's why personally I'm quite a supporter of stratospheric aerosol injection. Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming.
Yeah. And thanks so much for your article, Robert.
And thank you very much, Robert, for your work, and have a go at Guterres.
Okay, thank you so much.
No harm.
Okay.
Okay, right. All right.